So I want you to picture a trading floor in Singapore, February the 24th, 1995. A Friday morning, the desks are just starting to fill up. The screens are just flickering on. You know, those old screens, the one that you could always feel the static on. And there's just this one desk that nobody is sitting at. On that desk, there's a note, handwritten with only two words: I'm sorry. The man who wrote it is already gone. He's on a plane out of the country, and over the next 72 hours, the bank he worked for is gonna die. Not wobble, not get bailed out. It's gonna die. This was Barings. It was 233 years old, the oldest merchant bank in Britain. It had helped bankroll the wars against Napoleon. It helped finance the Louisiana Purchase. If you're not American, that's the deal that handed the United States a third of the country that sits on it today. It had the Queen of England as a client. And by the end of that weekend, the whole thing, all 233 years of it, would be sold to a Dutch bank for £1. Yeah, just £1. Now, there's one specific part that should really, really bother you. The man who did this was 28 years old. He didn't have a genius algorithm. He'd failed his maths exam in school. He had no risk model, nothing you would call sophisticated. What he had was a secret account with a number made of 5/8, a fax machine in his apartment, and a long, unbroken line of people whose actual job was to check on him. And they just didn't. So how does one guy with no special tools lose more money than his entire bank is worth and keep it hidden for more than 2 years? Well, that's the story. Let me get into it. Okay, to understand how badly this broke, you have to understand how solid it was supposed to be. Barings was founded in 1762 by a man named Francis Baring, the son of a wool trader out of Exeter. By the 1800s, it was so powerful that a French politician called it the sixth great power of Europe, right after England, France, Prussia, Austria, and Russia. Not a company, a power. And the thing about Barings that makes this whole story like land, it had already nearly died once before. It was back in 1890. It bet way too heavily on Argentine debt and almost went under for it. And the Bank of England, this should sound familiar, the Bank of England had to organize a rescue to save it. So this was a bank that had survived a near-death experience, survived 2 world wars, survived everything the 19th and 20th centuries could throw at it. But it didn't survive one man in Singapore. Like, that's crazy. But who was this man? Let me introduce you to him because he's not who you'd expect. Nick Leeson, born in Watford, just north of London on a council estate. His dad was a plasterer, his mom was a nurse, and he left school in the mid-80s, and the detail everyone loves to repeat, because it is a fact, is that he failed his maths A level. The guy who would go on to break a bank with derivatives could not pass school maths. What he was good at was the back office. Now, stay with me on this one, because the back office is going to matter way more than anything else in this entire story. In a bank, you've basically got two different worlds. You have the front office, who are the traders, that's the people placing the bets. The back office is the other side of that. The people who settle the trades, record them, and check that the numbers the traders are claiming actually match reality. The back office is the referee, let's say. Leeson was a referee, and he was a good one. He cleaned up £100 million mess of unsettled paperwork in Jakarta, and that's how he got noticed. And here's one detail that almost everybody who tells this story fails to mention. Before he ever left for Singapore, Leeson applied for a broker's license in the UK, and subsequently he was turned down because he lied on the application. He'd had a court judgment against him for an unpaid debt, and he didn't declare it, and as such, he committed a small fraud to try and get a license. He got caught and was refused. So then he went to Singapore, applied for a license there, and nobody mentioned the UK problem. Not him, not Barings, because nobody checked. Hold on to that, because that's the pattern here, okay? For everything that follows, that's the pattern. In 1992, Barings sent Leeson out to run their new operation in Singapore, trading futures on an exchange called SIMEX. And his job, the thing he was actually authorized to do, was about the most boring job in finance. It's called arbitrage, or in the trade, it's called switching. Here's how it works. The same product, in this case, a futures contract on the Nikkei, which is basically Japan's version of the Dow, gets traded in two places at once, in Singapore and in Osaka, Japan. And every now and then, for a few seconds, the prices vary slightly different in the two places. Maybe it's a fraction cheaper in Osaka than it is in Singapore. So you buy it in the cheap place and you sell it in the expensive place at the same time. And you pocket the tiny little difference. It's almost no risk because you're not betting on which way the market goes. You're buying and selling the same thing simultaneously. You're just collecting pennies. The trick is you collect those pennies thousands and thousands of times. That was his job. Safe, very dull, pennies at scale. And when Leeson got to Singapore, he didn't just run the trading desk, he also ran the back office, the settlement side, the referee side, right? So the same person who was placing the bets was also the person checking and recording whether those bets won. If you know anything about how banks are meant to work, that should make you wince, to say the least. If you don't worry. You're about to find out exactly why. There's a rule in finance, and it's genuinely as old as double entry bookkeeping. You never let the same person place a trade and confirm it. Ever. The person making the bet and the person writing down whether it won have to be two different people. It's called segregation of duties, and it exists for one pretty obvious reason. If you let someone do both, they can lie, and there's no one, not a single person, that can catch them. At Barings Futures Singapore, both of those jobs were done by Nick Leeson. He was the player and the referee. And once you understand that, the rest of this story is just watching what one person does when nobody is keeping score except him. It starts with an account, and the account has a beautiful, ridiculous name. Account 88888. 8 is a lucky number in Chinese culture, and 5 of them in a row was considered extra lucky. The account started out completely legitimate. It was an error account, the place you record little mistakes, like when a junior trader fat fingers an order. Every trading floor has one, okay? But Leeson did something clever and quiet with 88888. He hid it from London. He set it up so that head office in London couldn't see what was in it, while the Singapore exchange still saw it as a normal customer account. So to Singapore, it looked like an ordinary client's account. Nothing to really see there. And to London, it didn't exist at all. It was a junk drawer that only Leeson could open. And then he started putting things in that drawer. Now, by Leeson's own account, and I want to flag that because a lot of what we know about the early days comes from the book he wrote afterwards in prison. And a man explaining his own crimes is not, a neutral narrator. So it's important that you take some of this with a grain of salt, okay? By his telling, it began with someone else's mistake. A junior trader on his team bought when she should have sold, or sold when she should have bought, and it cost about £20,000. And instead of reporting it, which is what you're supposed to do, Leeson hid the loss in the 5/8 account. 20 grand. That's where it starts. Hold that number in your head, because watch what it's about to do. By the end of 1992, the losses hidden in that account were around £2 million. By the end of 1993, about £23 million. By the end of the following year, 1994, £208 million. £208 million of losses hidden in one account that one man controlled. And the truly insane part, while all that red ink was piling up in secret, what was Leeson telling London, right? Like, what was he saying to them? Well, he was telling them he was making a fortune because he controlled the books. He could report whatever profits he wanted. So he reported huge ones. In 1993, for example, he claimed around £10 million in profit, which was something like a tenth of the entire group's profit that year. In 1994, he reported $28 million. All of it was just invented. London looked at Singapore and they didn't see a problem. They saw a star, their golden poster boy, right? They were about to pay him a bonus of around £450,000. Ugh. Can you imagine how good that feels for him? And how dangerous? The more he loses, the more brilliant he looks. The hole and the halo are growing at exactly the same time. But of course, a secret like this needs feeding because those real positions in the 88888 account were live and the exchange wanted real money to cover them. That's called a margin call. When you're holding a big bet, the exchange makes you put down cash to prove you can cover it if it all goes wrong. And they ask for more every single day the bet moves against you. So Leeson needed cash, a lot of it. And he did the simplest thing imaginable. He asked London for it. And what do you think happened? London, of course, sent it. He was the golden child. And then they sent more and more. And by the end of 1994, London had wired about £220 million to Singapore. And by the end, it was over £740 million. The Bank of England had even quietly given Barings permission to ignore the normal limit on how much money London was allowed to send out to a single place. Nobody asked or even thought to ask the one obvious question. If Singapore is so unbelievably profitable, why does it keep needing us to send it more money? Profitable operations send money home. It works the opposite direction. They don't swallow it. But the profits looked so good that nobody wanted to be the person poking holes in them. All right, so now we're going to get to, quite frankly, my favorite moment in this whole story, because this is the one moment it should have all ended. It's like that near miss, right? So in 1994, the outside auditors, a firm called Coopers in Lybrand, were going through the books, and they found a hole, right? About 50 million pounds that didn't add up. And they did their job. They asked Leeson, "What is this? Where's this money?" So Leeson made up an answer. He invented a story that a big American firm called Spear, Leeds, and Kellogg owed Barings the money. And to prove it, he forged the paperwork. Because he's the referee, remember? He sat at home and faked documents, faxes that were supposed to come from this American firm, from Citibank, even one meant to look like it came from a boss in London. He literally cut and pasted letterheads and ran them through his own fax machine. And guess what? It worked. The auditors looked at the forgeries and accepted them. Except one of those forged documents had something printed across the top, a little line of text that the fax machine adds automatically. And that line said, "From Nick and Lisa." Lisa was his wife. So here is a document supposedly sent by a major New York brokerage firm confirming a 50 million pound debt, and it is stamped right at the top as coming from a guy named Nick and his wife Lisa. Somebody read that and signed off anyway. Oh, that's the near miss. I mean, seriously, if one person just stops and goes, "Wait, why does a letter from New York firm say it's from Nick and his wife?" This whole thing, this whole story just ends, right? It ends in 1994 as a 50 million pound embarrassment. Instead, it sailed through, and the hole just kept growing. So now, Leeson's losing money on his hidden bets, and he needs even more cash to feed that margin call, right? And he reaches for one more tool, and this is the one that's going to kill him, okay? This is that one. He starts selling options, specifically something called a straddle. So, for those of you who may not know, I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible because this really does matter, okay? So selling a straddle is like selling insurance against the market, doing something dramatic. People pay you a premium. As long as the market stays calm, nothing happens, and you just keep their money. You look like a genius. But if the market lurches hard up or down, it doesn't matter which, suddenly you owe. And there is basically no ceiling on how much you can owe. So, Leeson was effectively running an insurance company out of his secret account. He sold a mountain of insurance, all of it betting on the same thing, that the Japanese market would stay quiet and steady. He had bet the life of a 233-year-old bank on Japan being boring. But Japan, well, it was about to be anything but boring. On the 16th of January, 1995, Leeson placed another big bet that Tokyo would stay calm. He needed the Nikkei to hold steady, right? Somewhere around 19,000 points. It's a quiet market, he wins. Quiet market, the insurance he sold costs him nothing. The next morning, the 17th of January, at 13 minutes to 6, the ground under the Japanese city of Kobe tore open. I'm going to stop being clever for a moment because this part isn't clever. The Great Hanshin Earthquake was a magnitude 7.3. It killed 6,434 people. That morning is one of the worst days in modern Japanese history. And the financial story I'm about to tell you is a small thing standing next to that. I want to be straight about that before I say another word. The market did what markets do when a country is in shock. It fell, and it fell hard. And every piece of insurance Leeson had sold, every bet that Japan would stay calm, came due all at once. Now, a sane person staring at that cuts their losses, takes the hit, however brutal, and just stops. Leeson did the exact opposite. He doubled down. He started buying Japanese stock futures in enormous quantities, trying, basically by himself, to shove the entire Japanese market back up. He was betting that if he just bought enough, the Nikkei would bounce back and rescue all his positions. One man trying to lift a falling national stock market with a bank's money. And the positions got so big, they stopped making any sense. By the end, Barings, through Leeson, was holding something like $27 billion in these contracts. At one point, he was holding close to half of an entire Nikkei futures contract's open interest. I need to read that again. Half. He wasn't trading in the market anymore. He was the market. And when you're that big, you can't get out because there's nobody on the other side to sell to. The market just turns and grinds you down. It never bounced back. The Nikkei opened on the day of the earthquake at over 19,000, and it did not climb back to that level for the rest of the year. Far, far too late for Nick Leeson. Back in the office, the cracks, they were finally showing. A settlements man named Railton had been sent over from London, and he kept looking at the discrepancy in these accounts that he simply could not get to balance. He kept pushing Leeson on it. Where's the money? Why doesn't this add up? And on the 23rd of February, Leeson told him he had to step out for a bit. His wife wasn't well, he said, and he needed to go to the hospital. He walked out of the office, and he did not come back. He left the note on the desk. Just those two words. Then he faxed his bosses a resignation, and he ran. From Singapore to Kuala Lumpur, then onto Borneo, then trying to make his way all the way back toward Europe. He got as far as Frankfurt Airport in Germany on the 2nd of March, where the German police were waiting, and they arrested him. But by then, it didn't matter where he was, because back in London, over one single weekend, they'd finally opened the drawer. When London finally added it all up, the number was £827 million, more than twice the entire bank's capital. Everything Barings had doubled, just gone, and it would climb higher once they unwound all the positions to somewhere around 927 million. The Bank of England tried to save it. The governor cut short his weekend, got on the phone, and tried to put together a rescue, some group of institutions to step in and absorb Barings, but it failed. And the reason it failed is the perfect, brutal ending to the mechanism. It was those options. The insurance Leeson had sold because the market was still falling. Nobody could actually say how much more those positions might lose. The downside had no floor, remember? And you cannot rescue a number that won't stop moving. You can absorb a known loss, right? You cannot absorb a question mark. So everyone walked away. On the 26th of February, 1995, Barings was declared insolvent. 233 years over. A few days later, the Dutch bank ING bought the whole thing for £1 and put in £540 million of its own money to cover the wreckage. A bank that financed wars and banked the Queen sold for the price of nothing, really, because that's roughly what was left. This is the part that gets lost a lot of times. Staff all over the world, they just suddenly lost their jobs that weekend. And many of them lost the annual bonuses. They were days away from being paid. Money that they were already counting on. It was just gone because of a hole in Singapore they'd never heard of. As for Leeson, he was sent back to Singapore, and at the end of 1995, he pleaded guilty to 2 charges, including the forgery. The judge said he had spun a web of deceit and gave him 6.5 years in Changi prison. He served roughly 4. While he was inside, he was diagnosed with colon cancer, but he survived it, against a grim prognosis even. His marriage ended. Years later, he remarried and settled in Galloway in Ireland. He wrote a book. Ewan McGregor played him in a film. He became, of all things, the chief executive of an Irish football club. And these days, he works as a private investigator, chasing financial fraud for a living. Make of that what you will. All right, so here's the question that actually matters. Was this one bad man, or was this something worse? Because it would be easy and comfortable to file this under one rogue trader. The official inquiries refused to, right? No. In August of 1994, months before any of this blew up, Barings' own internal auditors looked at the Singapore office and they flagged it. In writing, even. They said one man should not be running both the trading desk and the back office, and that the roles needed to be split, specifically to reduce the risk of fraud. Guess what? Management read that report, and they did nothing. That November, an internal memo described the bank's own systems and controls as, and I'm quoting them, distinctly flaky. They knew. The official UK inquiry's conclusion was about as blunt as these things get. The collapse came down to one man's unauthorized trading, which went undetected because of a failure of management and controls of the most basic kind. Seriously, the most basic. It was what we just talked about at the very beginning of this video. It was not some exotic, unforeseeable flaw. The oldest rule in the book, the one about the player and the referee, was just ignored. The detail that really won't leave my head. 2 years before the collapse, the chairman, Peter Baring himself, had told the Bank of England that the firm was doing so well that they'd concluded it was, quote, not actually terribly difficult to make money in the securities business. He had no idea how right he was, and no idea how wrong. So the lesson of this channel, the thing that I'm going to keep coming back to in every single one of these episodes, is right here in the first one. These frauds are almost never genius. They're a failure of one boring control that nobody was watching because everybody assumed someone else was. The unchallenged star, the profits that are too good and too smooth to be true. The one person allowed to mark their own homework. And that hole has not been closed. We just keep rediscovering it. 13 years after Barings, a trader at a French bank called Société Générale, a man who, like Leeson, had come up through the back office, who knew exactly which controls weren't being watched, lost not 800 million, but nearly 5 billion euros. Several times what Leeson lost. The whole industry swore Barings had taught it a lesson. But it hadn't. But that's the next story. Headphones on. I'll see you there.